Hello, this is Stan Farnsworth recording for the NextFlex podcast, Electronics at the Edge. And I'm really excited. Workforce development is a really crucial element for continued development and implementation of hybrid and advanced electronics. And today, our guest is Becky Lewis, Director of Workforce Development for NextFlex. Becky, hi.
Morning.
Thanks for joining us today. We have a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here, Stan.
So for our listeners, just to set a little foundation, of course, hybrid electronics is the idea of actually incorporating multiple types of advanced non-traditional electronics. And so these are additive, flexible, printed, large area, organic. These are all technology types that fall into the hybrid electronics category, also fall within the scope of what we're doing at NextFlex. And we typically think about these from a project basis and from an application basis and from a commercialization basis. We think about what kinds of equipment and materials and use cases are important for getting these deployed out into the use space. What we have not talked about yet are the people that do these things. How do they know what to do? How do we find people and how are people trained and educated and brought into this space to do everything from design the systems, identify and work with the materials from an R&D perspective, design, build, run the equipment, all the way through the product lifecycle. Becky, talk to us a little bit about workforce and what NextFlex is doing to address some of these topics.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. As you know, I'm super biased and really passionate about workforce development because technology really doesn't advance on its own. People help it advance it, and people actually make it real, as you alluded to. And so I think the exciting thing about workforce and hybrid electronics is that it sits at this intersection of electronics, material science, manufacturing, and the technology is advancing so quickly. We really need to have these technicians, operators, engineers who know how to build, test, and integrate all of these things. And right now, the talent pipeline across the whole spectrum is really one of the biggest challenges with anyone that you talk to. And because, as you also said, that hybrid electronics really involves new materials and some materials that haven't been integrated or tried before. And now we're also looking at how do we digitally enable manufacturing processes and all of this. And so that requires a really different kind of skill set. One of the things that we hear a lot from employers when I talk to supervisors and also our member companies is that one of the things that's missing often in the workforce is that tenacity and that stick-to-itiveness of sticking with a problem from start to finish. And a lot of that is really required because some of these new substances haven't been applied before in these settings. And so people really have to be willing to try and fail and try and fail. And that's something that I think is really critical, especially for this technology. And that requires some training in school, certainly, but also really on the job training and that trial and error processes. So NextFlex is really committed to kind of creating different kinds of programs that can help people gain some of those skills and have that kind of tenacity for the workforce that's required.
So when we break this down into types of workforce, at the highest level, there's a scientific workforce. And these are folks that are probably coming from universities. They have advanced education, advanced degrees typically. They're looking at fundamentals of material science, physics. There's an engineering level. How do we take these concepts and apply them and do the design and conceptualization and embodiment of these? Then we have technicians that are running equipment, running factories, working on production lines, working on prototyping lines, and we have operators that are physically turning on and off the tools. Where, as you look at that, and including maybe even the education to bring awareness to people that are potentially looking at these topics at earlier points in grade school or high school. When you overlook this landscape, where do you see some of the most pressing needs and opportunities for workforce development across that really large landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Cato Institute did a study a few years ago that really looked at particularly Gen Z and their perceptions around manufacturing. And one of the greatest challenges, believe it or not, that we still have as a country is the perception around what manufacturing jobs look like in this country. There's a perception, particularly again, this was a study among Gen Z, that manufacturing is not safe as a career path, that it is not clean, right? So these are all things that we think about in terms of working in a coal mine, right? But these are still a predominant perception among a large portion of the US population. And so that greatly affects how people are choosing and how they're frankly advising their children, right? And relatives around kind of what career paths to pursue. And so I think that perception, even though when we think about mostly employers want to see outcomes and even funders want to see outcomes like people in jobs, right? And butts and seats. But the reality is to get there, we also have to address this broader narrative that's happening. So I think that broader narrative is really, really important in terms of how we're framing this, that cultural perception. And then also, I think the K to 12 population and our Flex Vector program has focused primarily on that age group with project-based learning around problem solving and incorporating hybrid electronics into that solution. But I think one of the gaps that I see currently, and I think we've not fully saturated, but I think there's a lot more programs happening kind of in the K to 12 space now across the country than certainly when we started Flex Factor with Project Lead the Way and a number of other examples. And so I think the gap where I see it now is really in that more technician slash incumbent worker space. I taught at a community college for 10 years. Teaching and upskilling adults is messy. It's not easy. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of nuance, right? And so it is far harder to control that kind of a training and even build that kind of a training that really meets the needs of diverse adult learners in a different way than even just like inspiring a bunch of elementary or middle schoolers. And I'm not being flip about that. I think we need each of these layers, right? I just think that there is kind of an opportunity for us to really focus on that middle layer of how do we help individuals that are kind of starting on their career path figure out where their skills are best aligned with some of these needs. And then how do we also help that existing workforce who maybe has been in an industry or related industry for a while and, for example, finds AI really intimidating and overwhelming. How do we help them work through that to really be able to figure out how they can apply their problem solving skills or their critical thinking skills towards this kind of a need for hybrid electronics and really translate that, but also operationalize it in a way that lands based on their kind of lived experience. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that, although it's definitely messier.
So you mentioned Flex Factor. Let's talk about Flex Factor as an engagement point earlier in that academic technology awareness cycle for children and teenagers. Talk to us a little bit about the target for Flex Factor, how that's set up. We'll talk a little bit about how folks might contact us, but then after that, we'll move on into what we're doing with universities, and then some recent experiences I know we have with different kinds of workshops that we have at our facility in San Jose. So tell us a little bit more about Flex Factor and the K-12 program.
Yeah, definitely. So Flex Factor, I wish I could take credit for it. I can't. It was the brainchild of my predecessors, but it is really a brilliantly developed program focused on really middle school to high school students. Ultimately, I think fourth grade through 12th grade is kind of the target audience. And really the concept was to kind of teach youth combination of entrepreneurial skill sets, business development, and then also awareness and an overview of advanced manufacturing and flexible electronics as a way to solve a real world problem. And so as part of the program, there is a standard curriculum, there's workbooks, but it's intended and designed to be as flexible as possible so that whether you're a student at a school in a rural community with very limited resources or you're a student in a well-funded district with lots of resources and you have 3D printers, either way, both of those settings can operate and implement the program effectively, and the students can have positive results. And so the students develop a prototype to solve a problem. So for example, I know one student looked at integrating hybrid electronics as a way to kind of address mental health monitoring for veterans. And so looking at, is there a way that you can use hybrid electronics to monitor elevated heart rate as a symptom of PTSD and other things? And so there have been ways that it's really been uniquely applied. And the benefit is that they develop a prototype. It can be just something they draw on paper, or it can be physically something that they build, or it can be something that they create a PowerPoint presentation and present. They present something to judges, to a panel of industry experts who then rank them like in a Shark Tank kind of environment. And then they get feedback either way. And then there is like an advancement on to next kind of levels of competition if the students succeed. But either way, they're getting this really tangible, real world experience solving an actual problem that they care about. And students have solved everything from environmental issues using hybrid electronics to creating something that was more efficient for the lunch ladies in their cafeteria to something like, an advanced medical device. So there's quite a continuum. And I think just seeing the passion and that creativity and the problem solving that it ignites in young people at a wide range of ages and experiences. And also that, again, it can really be used with very limited resources or advanced resources. I think that has been one of the greatest strengths of the program.
And so if someone wanted to find out more about Flex Factor for their organization, what should they do?
Well, we have a great bit of information on our website. We also do have a contact form, so you can reach out to us. There's a workforce development email. They can also reach out to the overall NextFlex email, and then someone from our team will reach out and follow up. And we can certainly kind of walk through an overview of what the program is, provide some different options of how it could be integrated depending on the setting and their needs and what that looks like. So we would love to connect with anyone who's interested.
And it's pretty exciting. I've been able to see a couple of final presentations with students at different NextFlex events and public conferences. And it really gives the students a taste of being a professional innovator. They get to talk about their work, they get to answer questions, they get to interact with really terrific people at the innovator level in the hybrid electronics universe. And it's really exciting to see that.
Yeah, one of my favorites was when we had the team of 4 young women who had won the regional competition in the Bay Area, and they presented at Innovation Days last year. And that was a really powerful example of not only having to apply those innovation skills, but also that professional development of getting up in front of a room full of 150 people and presenting, and then being able to have that sit down after and actually talk through their idea with people in industry that were interested in kind of how they would implement it. So I thought that was a great example as well.
What a great experience. And of course, that depends on close collaborations with teachers and faculty and parents and
Absolutely.
other all sorts of colleagues. It's the students plus an entire ecosystem of support
Yep.
around that.
Takes a village.
It does take a village. So you think Flex Factor is providing these students an opportunity to not just learn about the hybrid electronics, but then also go through that innovation development process where they identify a pain point, apply some creativity and problem solving, apply hybrid electronics as the potential tool, a technology tool to help them get through that. But then they communicate that, and we know that a really important part of innovation is not just the technology, but the communication around that. And that's what else I love about Flex Factor is that communication it's a soft skill associated with technology that's so important for the participants and for the ideas of these technologies to be implemented to see value.
Definitely. Yeah, that communication is really important. And even just being able to have that practice, not only in communication, but in the public speaking, right? Which is often and a course in of itself, even in college, right? Because it's a
Yes.
freaking skill that we have to learn that, that takes a lot of practice to fine tune.
Yeah, that is a lifelong learning
Yeah.
trajectory right there for sure. Talk to us a little bit about what we're doing with community colleges. Once the students graduate high school, whether they go straight to university or to a community college, or as you've mentioned in your experience, these are workers returning to an education point and through a community college. Tell us what we're doing. Talk to our audience a little bit about what we're doing with community colleges.
Definitely. Well, I should say that community colleges have always been a critical partner for NextFlex because the Flex Factor program historically was based out of community colleges and delivered in the K to 12 system. So community colleges were always part of that ecosystem. And I think that's really helped us then as we look at wanting to support the next kind of pain point of what happens as you move on in your educational and career journey. We've already had a lot of those partnerships well in place. So one of the partnerships that we have in existence is with Central New Mexico Community College, and we have been piloting a boot camp that was really focused on training military spouses. They completed an Internet of Things boot camp. They then went into an internship with Hiring Our Heroes. And for those of you that don't know, military spouses have one of the highest unemployment rates, was at 21% at some point. And a population that, because they're so transitory, they're moving so frequently, it's often hard to hold down a consistent job, particularly if you're looking for place-based employment. And so one of the things that we really wanted to look at with this was how to help that group have a core set of skills that were transferable to multiple locations. So as they were relocating with their spouse, they would be able to get employed in a comparable occupation over and over again. And so the Internet of Things boot camp with CNM was a really great place to start. Hiring Our Heroes has a wonderful program where they actually provide a paid internship for these students. So the students did have to take time off to do the boot camp, which was an intensive time, but then they have a paid internship. And then we've had really good success with the students completing the program, going into job placement. And one of the students now that actually went through the program and completed it is now back working with Central New Mexico Community College to kind of help recruit and place additional students. So that's a pretty cool story. And I think the nice thing about that is like thinking about some of these students have no science experience. And so thinking about, does it have to be someone who would see themselves as a STEM person? Not necessarily. It can be someone who maybe has a totally different background, but has a curiosity and passion for this, and then really is willing to put in the work to learn and to commit the time to, which is certainly not easy. So that's been a really neat program to kind of see the evolution of that. And then we're working on, which I'm really excited about, and I can only say like a little bit just because it's still kind of in process, but we're working on building out some training and our own boot camp that will be specific to kind of the technician level population, and really looking at how do we expose people to hybrid electronics and get them some initial skills that then help them become employable and have some opportunities in addition to their current program. So for example, if they're already enrolled at like an industrial maintenance technician program at a community college or doing some other apprenticeship or boot camp, this would be an additional experience that they could have that would orient them to hybrid electronics specifically. Because as we talked about, hybrid electronics, it's not going to have its own degree program, right? So you can't go to a community college or a four-year school even and take necessarily a course in it or complete a program in it. It's really the kind of thing that you have to have this layered on approach, because you need the other skills that you're already getting, because it is highly interdisciplinary. But then you also need an awareness and knowledge of what this means for the industry that you're in and how you would integrate it. And so that's what we're hoping to be able to offer. And so I'm excited, we're building that, and we'll have something in the next year.
Sure, we'll do a follow-up on how that's progressing so our listeners can understand what the impact of that could be and how they can get involved in that program. And I know that even for people that have gone through university programs, advanced degrees, PhDs in material science, even, we have programs to support their involvement in hybrid electronics as well. I know that we recently had one of our workshops featured a group from Los Alamos National Labs, and they're in the nuclear materials management group. And these are very well educated people that are at the top of their very complex fields, but they were not necessarily familiar with the particulars of hybrid electronics. They had a sense of the sorts of capabilities that hybrid electronics might provide as they're working through some very specific programs and project needs they had. So we hosted them at our facility for a few days with context, providing them details informed by the background of their program so we could apply content that would align with their direction and interests. But they came away much more informed with materials, with specific fabrication and tool capabilities. This updated their understanding of deliverables for their program and capabilities that they may be able to embody, and we're still working forward with them as well. And then at the university level as well, through our NOTE program, we have active programs with universities around the country. In one of our earlier podcasts, With Dr. Scott Miller, we talked about nodes and structuring around that. And Becky, as you and I have been talking about even recently, this node structure is a key element for continuing to get workforce development stronger and stronger, able to provide additional support into industry. And let me tell you, as I'm out and about at conferences and events, working with clients, one of the top issues I hear about is workforce development. I don't hear clients lamenting a lack of material science capability. I don't hear clients lacking vision on use cases. It is about workforce development at every level of engagement.
The gap that I often see is that it is a consistent narrative and a consistent challenge. And the main challenge, because again, we can't move forward a lot of this technology without the workforce, and yet it is not funded and supported at the level we need to truly have, a broad-based national impact. And so that's what I would say is kind of the catch 22 with where we are as a country with looking at this. And this is not like an NextFlex specific thing. This is like a much broader conversation.
Well, let's talk about what it might take to make progress towards expanded workforce development to address commercial needs, to address national security needs, funding. That's the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the funding environment right now. What's changed? Where do we think it's headed? I don't know if we can say where we think it's headed because that's a crystal ball exercise, but talk to us a little bit about funding and what are some options for moving forward on this.
Looking to 2026, I think given some of the executive orders that came out with a focus in particular on apprenticeships, on trades, we know that manufacturing is a priority with this administration. I think that even though we saw a lot of money pulled back at the federal level in 2025, I think it is likely that there will be some targeted release of funds. I would hope through like the Department of Labor and through other entities that will be really specifically aligned with the executive orders and therefore will help push that agenda forward in a way that benefits workforce. And there is actually currently a forecasted opportunity under the Department of Labor for apprenticeship. So that's good. It's not a promise, but it's potential.
So it's fair to say that we are closely monitoring a variety of funding sources. So federal government for sure. We see that there are still regional opportunities with economic workforce development programs. So we're working through those. But from my perspective, workforce development is really a collaborative challenge. It's not a single source, single point solution. These are solutions that really depend on collaboration. So when we think about collaboration, we think about funding collaboration. NextFlex is not funding these efforts. We depend on funding in order to execute and drive collaboration. So we're very open to work with communities of all sizes and levels at all levels of funding support. Our mission and charter is to help grow workforce capabilities. And so that's a conversation that we love to have. We love to work with educational institutes at all levels, size, scope, place, time, all these pieces. Those are conversations. Becky, I know you love those conversations. And then with potential students, the people that are interested in this as a topic should get in touch with us. But how can we work with so many of these different kinds of groups? What kinds of mechanisms do we have to be able to go forward like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really beneficial. And so I think to the extent that we can have more folks coming on this podcast and doing some really thoughtful storytelling around their experiences, both like as a workforce participant and also as a stakeholder in the broader workforce kind of stratosphere. I think all of that would be really impactful. And yeah, as you said, I am always lovingly biased towards community colleges because I taught at one for so long and think that they're great workforce partners. But we also want to make sure that we're partnering at the state level with economic development, with K to 12, with CTE programs, with other nonprofits. I am seeing a surge right now, and I think everyone is, of a lot of fundings coming out in a variety of different areas. So we would love to, even if we haven't worked with a nonprofit before, we would love to have a conversation and see if there's an opportunity to align. And so I think there's a lot kind of unknown going forward, but I think there's a lot of opportunity as well.
There's certainly a large need for it. Becky, thank you for joining us today. Becky Lewis, Director of Workforce Development at NextFlex. I think we have some exciting times ahead, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dan. It was fun.
So for NextFlex, and electronics at the edge. This is Stan Farnsworth. Until next time.